Yeah, let me just type in the website. It's a work in progress, so the website's not really done yet, but I think there's a small version of the family tree there. Let me see if I could screen share.
Okay. And Mark Olson points out in the chat that if it was first available at Seattle, it should be eligible for a best related work, Hugo.
That's what people were saying because I don't think because since the comic is technically still in the ashcan phase yet, I don't think it'll be eligible for the for the Hugo, but I definitely think this would be. I don't know. The Hugo Awards are open for voting. Speaking of which, the furry fandom's equivalent of the Hugo, the Ursa Major Award, is actually open for voting for the next week. And actually, this has been nominated for best graphic story. So if it's open for anyone to vote. But yeah, this is the version of the family tree I have here. I'm going to zoom in a bit, but you can see I'm actually using the different world cons as the markers for the different stuff for the divisions. I also
Okay.
saw some people in the chat saying like not all the modern conventions has all the markers, and that's actually part of the story as well. Because, for example, modern cons, some of them got rid of the art show or the banquet, but there's definitely an evolution. So, for example, furries no longer have a costume masquerade, but they have a fursuit parade, which evolved from the costume masquerade. So you still see a lot of DNA markers and stuff like that. So I have two YouTube channels. So my con history YouTube channel, I'm going to try to update it with more panels, but I do have a lot of my early panels up here on con history. It's just con history on YouTube. I have a panel I did at Anthrocon in 2024 called 85 Years of Fan Conventions. And that actually won the Ursa Major Award for Best Nonfiction Work. And on my main YouTube channel, I talk a lot of different stuff. So I talk about transformation, transformative art, and I have a panel called 85 Years of Con Cosplay from Costume Masquerade to Fursuit Parade. This one's also currently nominated for an Ursa Major Award, so it's eligible for voting right now. But I do have these two channels currently, and I'm working with someone to try to get a proper website made because the main goal with this family tree is I want it to be very dynamic. So I want you to click on individual threads and see like the roots. So you could see how that con evolved or had different names over the years and zoom in and out and see all the different connections between the cons and the staff of other cons that help get that con started. So I do want this to be more dynamic, but like I said, I haven't settled on the final family tree yet because it's constantly evolving. And already I think I have to change it because every time I release a new version of the family tree, people point out that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. So I have to rework it again. Um, Especially how chaotic it gets towards the end with the multi media conventions really absorbing a lot of the conventions.
Are,
But I believe it's online right now on the website, but we're trying to work on a newer version for it.
are there any particular points of divergence that or evolution that you want to point out while we have it up?
Oh, sure. So the first type of conventions I would argue that came off of the science fiction cons are the comic conventions. We could say New York Comic Con in 1964 was really the first, but then it was followed by a bunch of different ones, including Golden State Comic Con, which became San Diego Comic Con. But what's interesting about this is I like to show. So when, like I said, there's that DNA that the World Con started because that DNA filtered into the Western cons, Midwest cons, and all the early science fiction cons. Um, but then when a new con branches off, they they take what normally came before and either exclude it or innovate it. And what was interesting is the comic cons were really the first to get cut off before filk culture really, really got big. So filk, of course, has been a thing since the first conventions, but filk culture, as we know it with the filk circles and stuff, really emerged right before the Star Trek conventions. So Filk, so Comic Cons didn't really carry a Filk tradition, which is interesting because if you go to even the modern Comic Cons now, they don't have concerts or Filk circles or any equivalents of that. But every single con after, anime cons, furry cons, even My Little Pony conventions have some modern equivalent of a Filk tradition. But the big split is probably when Star Trek fandom came about because that was the first time we really moved from a single track programming to a multi-track programming. So surprisingly, for the first 40 years of conventions, there was only one panel. And it was assumed everyone would go to that one panel. And if you didn't like the panel, you went to the bar. So everyone went to that one panel. And when Star Trek fans, Trekkies, and Trekkers started filling up these early science fiction conventions, they overwhelmed the panels of all these Star Trek panels, and a lot of the old science fiction attendees didn't want to go to Star Trek panels, and that's where we got the birth of multi-track programming. But Star Trek is really what changed the DNA. So a lot of the modern ideas with con running, so the Gopher system, con security forces like the Dorsai regulars and Flare really emerged from this period. And this was the period where the room party floor really exploded, and I would argue that was the big split that basically changed everything. And I would also argue this is when the Star Trek cons started dwindling, they shifted to become multimedia conventions. And that's when the Star Trek cons shifted to multimedia, basically becoming the generic pop culture conventions, which was highlighted by science fiction beforehand. And that's when I would argue is when science fiction cons became more niche instead of more pop. And that ended up absorbing a lot of comic cons along the way as well. The other interesting split is the Cartoon Fantasy Organization, originally started in Los Angeles. And it was originally started as the first organized anime fan club in the United States. And it was through the Cartoon Fantasy Organization, a lot of the people who ran Baycon were the first anime conventions in the United States, AnimeCon, which became Anime Expo, and the first Furry Cons conference got started. So it's interesting that Cartoon Fantasy Organization basically created two separate fandoms and convention scenes, animes and furries. Um, some
There,
other interesting ones, for example, you notice I actually put bronies on here as well. So Star Trek and My Little Pony are really the two individual fandoms that get their own branch because of how much they contributed to the con scene. So a lot of stuff that the Trekkies and Trekkers were doing in the 70s and 80s is what the bronies really started to do in the 2010s. But what's interesting is bronies specifically is kind of the love child between the Star Trek conventions and the furry conventions, and they kind of created like their own unique separate branch as well. And then in Japan, you have a completely different tradition with the Dondinshi circles. So the Dondinshi circles would be kind of the equivalent to what fanzines and the Tijuana Bibles were in the Western world, and they expanded their own idea. So another interesting thing is convergent evolution. So both the Artist Alley at the comic convention scene and the artist alley in the Dondinshi conventions evolved independently, and they both use the term artist alley. So now you have the term artist alley used by two different types of conventions. But the original artist alley at the comic cons were basically professionals working in the comic book industry, while the artist alley at the Dondinshi conventions like Comic Cat were specifically fan artists drawing often smut stuff.
yeah,
Um, so
IlixCon, IlixCon also
yeah.
uses the term Artist Alley,
Yep.
and that's a science fiction and fantasy
Yep.
illustration convention.
Yeah, so
There are a bunch of questions in the chat
sure.
specifically about the family tree. The first question here is, are academic this is from Fred Lerner, are
Hmm.
academic science fiction conferences represented on your chart?
I have not yet because as you can see, it's already very muddled and very chaotic. So I think once I figure out finding a programmer who could actually do my intended vision of looking at individual cons, I'll add them. But already there's so much because there's like the college conventions and university conventions are another thing I still have to add. Horror conventions, how fantasy conventions kind of also split off. There's a lot of stuff I have to add. So I haven't added the academic stuff yet, even though
I,
I definitely should. But it's just, yeah, like I said, very.
it's work in
Um, I'm,
progress.
yeah, I'm looking at. I think at the moment I'm looking at the main branches. So I
Okay.
divided conventions into specific branches, and I'm just focusing on those branches first. And then hopefully, once the template is there, everyone else can start adding
Right.
or
Okay.
manipulating it.
Murray Moore from the Toronto area points out that BoucherCon, the mystery version of the Worldcon, was created by science fiction fans. I don't know if you have non, what do we call it now? Science fiction and fantasy elements on the chart, but that's another possibility. Um,
Yes, that's why I kind of have, I think, science fiction in this nebulous shade of blue. So I kind of have fantasy and horror cons represented here, but definitely these and mystery, but definitely these would be their own separate branches. It's just I don't have enough research done on this area yet that I'm just kind of putting all speculative fiction to one thread at the time for the time until I have the time to untangle it later. But
okay.
it
Um,
will be represented.
so there's also, I could tell you that there's some discussion in the chat, and people would
I can see.
disagree with you on multi-track programming and where it
Yeah.
started. There's one view that Jerry Jack started it in San Francisco,
Hmm.
and there's another one that okay. Um, let's see. All right, so I'm holding
So
some for after.
it's funny because I believe it was at ShyCon when I had an early version of this timeline that had multi-track with a question mark, and I had three different people come up into me and said, PhilCon started the multi-track. I know because I'm friends with the person who started it. And someone else said New York started the multi-track, and I know because I was there when it started. LunaCon started the multi-track. So it was like I had like a bunch of different people saying they or their con started multi-track, and it I think that I'm still trying to figure it out what it was. But the main thing I want to get with that, I have to look at a lot of these old programming books to really decide. But the main thing I want to get out for the first 40 years, there was only single track. And all of a sudden there was multi-track. And it coincided in the late 60s and early 70s. And that was right around the time Star Trek fandom started picking up. So again, that's kind of just my theory at the moment is that was part of it. But yeah, for the first 40 years, it was all single track, which, and then it just changed, which
Okay,
is the main
so
point I was trying to get across.
no, this is great stuff. Um, how are you holding up? I know you're just getting off of an illness.
Oh, I'm doing good. Yeah.
Okay, so normally we do Q&A at the end, but there's so many questions about this
Oh,
family
sure.
tree. If you're okay with it, we'll do some Q&A now, and then we'll
Oh,
go back, we'll get rid of these guys, and we'll go back to talking about the other big contribution that you've made, and the Wrath of Khan. Okay? If that's okay, we can do it?
yep. I'm happy to take questions. Yep.
Okay, in that case, Maggie, why don't you unmute? Oh, I'm not sure. I can't spotlight you because he's screen sharing. So Maggie, just unmute and ask your question. Go ahead and ask it now.
Yes, I noticed the first two conventions that you list, one had 10 attendees, one had 14. How do you differentiate a picnic or a get together or a let's hang out at a hotel for a couple of days to an actual convention? Is it programming?
So that's actually why I still my original definition was that 3 day Worldcon because of all the hallmarks that it had. Because a similar situation happened with, for example, the early Brony fandom. So before the first Brony convention, there was 1 day meetups, and it's like, could those be conventions? If this was in the 1930s, they would technically be considered conventions, and that's also why I don't say that first convention in Philadelphia was technically a con. That's why I don't use it as my definition of con, but I still acknowledge it because, like you said, there was no programming, but they claimed they had meetings, but there was no meeting minutes preserved. And yeah, it was essentially it was formed as just a meetup. It was only Woolman or Kyle sometimes say that he was the one who claimed they argued, oh, why don't we just call this a convention? That's how the story goes. So it was kind of impromptu. if a one-day meetup called itself a convention, could it be technically a convention? We don't know. There was that attempt, that science fiction league meeting where Chicago fans tried to meet New York fans in 1934. They technically hung out. Could that be considered a convention by the same definition of that first Philadelphia one? That could be considered a convention. But
Do you want input from Dave Kyle's kids?
yeah. Oh
Because
yeah, I
they're
definitely would like to chat
friends.
with them.
Okay, so later. Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
we can set you up.
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you, Maggie. Lex, would you unmute, please, and ask your question?
Hi. Actually, I thought I heard you mention something about the time of the Star Trek cons also being sort of the rise of the party, party track culture in the evenings, but there's a whole history of like room 770, file 770 that goes
Yes.
back way back. And
No, no,
also I assume
yeah.
earlier. Maybe I
Oh
misheard.
yeah, no, no. I was talking about, yeah. So I was saying the lifeblood of the cons, the party floor system. I would argue, yeah, basically started much earlier. We have the Dead Dog Party that Mort Weisinger threw at that first World Con, and I would argue, even what Moroyo was doing at that second World Con was technically a type of room party as well. You were saying rooms 770 was definitely the birth of all night fan culture. So yeah, that was where the early parties kind of came from, and I think it was definitely where a lot of the early party floor system would come from. In fact, when I turned this into a history book, definitely the 40s, specifically the 50s, is where the party. I'm going to talk mostly about the parties. I would say mostly parties with the Star Trek cons because that's where I was saying the parties started to split off. That's where you would see parties that were kind of formed around specific fandoms start to say, "Oh, we're big enough that we could be our own convention," and that's when they start to just toss themselves off to the wayside. Um, but yeah, that the tradition still continues today. Especially, I think the Klingons throw some room parties at some cons, which I think are great. But yeah, you're correct. The party floor system was definitely much earlier. I'm trying to figure out if there was a specific party floor, which con had the first party floor. I also would like to mention the
Joe, I'm frozen.
oh, yeah,
You're not frozen anymore.
okay.
Okay, it seems to be back now. I froze for a minute. I'm sorry. Okay, let's see. Next was oh, I've lost track. Oh, John Singer. Can you unmute and ask, make your comment?
I was wondering how if or how the family tree accommodates things like con, which have multiple sections that cover different fandoms.
So I put Dragon Con in the multimedia conventions. Following, I would say Dragon Con is really the first of the post Star Trek. Like when I said when the shift of what defined general convention shifted from science fiction to the post Star Trek conventions, I would say Dragon Con is really one of the big ones that were part of that tradition, which is why I have Dragon Con actually in purple instead of red, like the science fiction. I would like, unlike the Comic Cons, which ended up becoming multimedia cons. But yeah, I will put Dragon Con in that. It does definitely have that tradition of the science fiction cons um, as well. But the fact that it has all these different sections dedicated to different conventions, I'll say that's basically it was really part of that shift to that wave to include all the different types of fandoms.
Yeah, the Detroit Triple Fanfare was probably first.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Jerry, do you want to unmute and ask your question, please?
No, I want to hear what the answer to Fred Lerner's question is.
Okay, wait a minute. Where's Fred's question?
He's asked it twice in slightly different spelling.
Okay. All right, Fred.
What is a doujin, or how it's pronounced, and what does it mean? I never heard that word before.
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
Doujin. What is it? How is it pronounced, and what does it mean? I have been around the scene for half a century or more, and I've never encountered that word before.
Oh, did I put it here? BOJ.
The the big yellow thing.
Oh, this one.
Yeah, him.
So this is the Dondinshi conventions. So Dondinshi, like I was saying, is kind of the Japanese equivalent of what fanzines and Tijuana Bibles are here in the West. So so they actually the largest convention in the world is Comic Ket, also known as Comic Market. It's held in Japan twice a year, and it has no programming, no concerts, no guest of honor. It's essentially one giant artist alley. So it's basically one giant convention hall where everyone is selling their self-published fan-made comics. And the fact that there's so many different types of dondenshi is it's they have different sections of the convention center just dedicated to different stuff. And it's fascinating because a lot of it is very, very similar to the type of stuff that we see here in the West. So we have a lot like the Star Trek shipping zines. There's a there's a lot of shipping culture where they take popular anime and manga characters, even non-Japanese characters, and do like fan comics of these characters in ship relationship situations. But then there's a lot of people who start their own original comics. In fact, in the 80s and 90s, a lot of new comic manga artists got started because their dondenshi were discovered by publishers and they were asked to make their own manga series. And even today, when I went there for my first time 2 years ago, it's not just like fan comics. It's so diverse. They even have an entire section of their artists alley just dedicated to people who make comics about trains, for example, or transportation, or it's so diverse. So it's basically, I guess the equivalent would be it's essentially a giant convention that's dedicated to just zines. And it's three times bigger than San Diego Comic Con and held twice a year, which
Wow.
shows the scale of it. Yeah.
Wow, wow, wow. The, okay,
It
thank you.
got started from science fiction cons actually. The Japanese science fiction con actually had these artists. They had their own little circle at the convention, and they got so big they overwhelmed the convention. And that's a story you're going to hear over and over again. One niche fandom overwhelms a specific science fiction con. They get kicked out of that convention, and they form their own convention, and that's how it got started. So
Okay. Marlon, you had your hand up.
Yes. First of all, I applaud you for this Herculean effort. This is huge. How can fans support your work? Like, is the family tree available for sale, even though it's a work in progress?
I don't have it for sale at the moment because, like I said, it is a work in progress. Normally, if I do attend a convention, I normally print out a large version of it or small versions of it and put it in the art show for people to bid on. I think right now how you can support my work is if you know people like Maggie was talking about the kids of Kyle. If you know people who are involved with this fandom period, I think at the moment information and connections is very very valuable to me. So if you could send me information, even if it's just old photos, scans of old con books and zines, or just hey, this is the email of the granddaughter of this individual, for example. That would be very, very helpful for me at the time, for this time. And eventually I'll get a Kickstarter going, and that's probably where you can help support it. But for the meantime, I think at the moment I just need as much help gathering information to begin with.
Okay. Are you from Jerry Kaufman, who did not ask his question? He's wondering if you're going to integrate conventions from other countries. such as the UK and Australia?
Yes, that's I admit this because this history started as just looking at the conventions of Baltimore. This is a very American centric timeline, and the only other country I really have is Japan represented. But yeah, the point is to incorporate all the different conventions for the different countries. So for the time being, I do have I only have. I'm trying to represent the at least the science fiction conventions of different countries within that science fiction branch, and of course note all the different world cons, including the world cons that came from that were held in different countries. But yeah, the idea is to incorporate all the different countries because it also shows the different evolutions of how some of the different countries would influence how their specific cons are ran. Um, but that's going to be the main goal. But at the moment, it started specifically American centric. So at least after I get the first wave out, then it's going to kind of expand to, as you can see, it's a very Herculean task. So
Yeah.
that's definitely like probably phase 10 or 13. It's like way, way down the line.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. Lenny, you've had a number of comments, and I think you wanted to say something about Joe Statton's book. Would you please unmute and make your comment?
All right. Well, I think I'm unmuted. I was just wondering whether Alex is familiar with this. It's a comic that was funded, I think, by the New York Public Library, among others. The Secret History of Jewish Comic Book Creators. And I put a link to it on the chat. And I think it's an amazing piece of work. And I'm amazed by the caricatures that Joe did of all of the original comics creators and science fiction fans. Mort Weisinger, Julius Schwartz, the whole crew. And he kind of follows the history of this all the way up to the present day. So that's all. All. The other thing about party floors, maybe this is kind of late in the game, but I always thought that WisCon was kind of a pioneering SF convention from our fandom that popularized having specific party floors that individual groups could make available. And the experience of attending WisCon was in its own way a multicultural experience. All right, well that's pretty much it. But definitely you should look at the sketches on the sidewalk history of comic book creators if you haven't seen it.
Uh, Definitely will check that out. Thank you. That sounds very helpful for me. Look that
Thank
up.
you, Lenny. Okay, I think we're out of questions now about the convention tree. So back to you, Alex. Let's move on.
Sure. So I'm not going to go into this as much, but basically the comic I'm currently working on will mostly be focusing on the first 10 years of First Fandom. So basically from the early science fiction clubs to that first Worldcon is kind of this. So if we zoomed into that first part of the family tree, is basically what I putting here. So this is going to be most of the history that I'm going to be covering in my book. But yeah, so I think I could stop sharing then.
Okay.
But yeah,
So all right, so this is with the tree, you are making a set of observations and conclusions about the evolution of conventions. With the Wrath of Khan, you are depicting history. You may make some choices between different versions of history, but it's more of a straight narrative. Can you talk a little bit about that representation of history and if the anthropomorphic nature of it is making it more appealing to younger audiences, and talk about that.
so The Rafikon, I'm planning to make it. I think it's at least going to be 6 or 7 issues long. But it's basically going to be it's going to be about 30 to 40 pages per issue. So assuming I pump out one issue a year, it's going to probably be another decade of
Are you
me
going to
doing
do
this.
a decade per issue? I mean, what's
I
your
don't
plan
know.
for a couple?
The original plan was okay, I'm just going to, if I can't finish the history book, I'm going to, it was originally to be one series was going to cover one fandom. So series one was just going to be the first 10 years.
Wow.
Series two was going to cover science fiction, then comics fandom, then anime fandom, then
Okay.
furry fandom. But the fact that it's taking me so long just to get the first issue done, um, it's like, okay, I can't do that. So I'm just going to focus on this. It's going to be probably one issue a year, just as long as I get this out. And then all the feature fandoms, I might just dedicate one special issue for each. But the main characters haven't even been introduced yet. But the story in Raffican is really going to be the friendship and then the rivalry between Sakura, um, Woman and Michelle, who were all initially started as friends, teamed up with each other to fight against Hugo Gernsback, put out this notion of what Worldcon could be, and then fractured into two factions because they divergently disagreed on what the definition of fandom should be. And so, really, the story is going to be the rivalry between these two separate groups. And then to kind of help me with that in my mind, I have a playlist of different folk songs, and I have folk songs representing the Futurians and the folk songs representing like new fandom. So I kind of had them playing just to write these characters separately. But they're not even going to be introduced in the first one. I'm not even sure they'll be introduced in the second one yet. So the first 2 issues are just going to kind of be a straight history. I think if there is a character, Alan Glacier, who is the guy who formed the Science Seers, is kind of the first tragic character of the first issue, and the second issue is really just going to be the start of the Science Fiction League. So there's a bunch of different characters there, Swartz, Horing, and yeah, I think I'm going to introduce David Kyle in that issue as well. But the idea to make them anthropomorphic characters is I'm taking, like I said, I'm using the funny animal comic tradition, but I'm also borrowing a little from Mouse and a little bit from Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics. And it's actually funny. I'm not sure if you have all seen the meme online yet, but the Scott McCloud meme that it's online right now, which is funny because that's kind of been part of my early panels, is Scott McCloud has this idea of amplification through simplification. So the more cartoony and more simplistic you draw a character, they become like a blank template for the reader to put themselves in. Um, so it's easier to identify with a character that doesn't look like a realistic human. Because if I drew these characters as realistic humans, you might just associate them with people in your lives or people who actually knew these individuals and say, "Oh, that woman doesn't look like this. The Cora doesn't look like this," and they'll have their own vision in their head. So by drawing them as anthropomorphic animals, it's a way to just kind of get rid of that, do the amplification or simplification, make them a little bit more identifiable. Because some of these people ended up having some problematic takes, I think, later on, and I don't want to make them specifically heroes, but I do want you to kind of identify with them initially. And it's also kind of a way to get the furry fandom a little bit more involved because currently I think the only convention scene that has been inviting me to cons to do my con history panel has been the furry conventions lately. So the fact that the furries have been mostly interested in my research, I thought, okay, making them as anthropomorphic animals will help me make it more appealing to furries as well and get the younger audience involved. So I'm trying to make this an all age comic so you could hand it to your kids and it will make kids who would probably have no interest in this early period of fandom. If I drew them as regular humans, I don't think anyone would be young generations would not be interested at all. But if I drew them as animals, it will kind of attract a lot of the younger generations who might put themselves in the shoes and maybe if there's characters alike, even draw fan art of them. And that's a great way to try to hopefully spread awareness of this period of fandom.
Yeah, and there's certainly a lot of byways and such, and where you could make emphasis on whatever groups you wanted to. I mean, LA is
Yeah.
full of good stories.
Yeah.
Just read Laney and you'll find out. I wanted to, I'm sure you have heard this, but the history of fandom starts to get hard to articulate when you hit the 60s. We have good histories of fandom up till the 60s, but multiple people have broken their pick on trying to write a coherent book about fandom in the 60s. So if you get to that decade, then that'll be challenging.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
I'm
so
already looking at it too because you're saying I'm going to be honest, the Rafikon comic specifically is going to be really focused on East Coast, specifically New York fandom. But to make sure it's fair, I'm actually writing a separate history. This will actually be a book, it won't be a comic, but specifically the lead up to San Diego Comic Con, and that will focus more on West Coast fandom out of Los Angeles and California specifically. But that won't be a comic; that'll be just a separate history book. But
okay.
yeah, especially in the '60s, that's where a lot of the formations of the comics fandom started, and that I think at that point, once that's why this period is a little bit easier because there are fewer characters. There's a lot of characters, but there are fewer characters, and a lot of them have roles across the decade. That's easier to tell a personal story of conflicts between these individuals. Like once we get to the 60s and 70s, there's so many different people. You can't really pick one character to be a central character, which is also why I don't think I could properly do a comic on that period as
We get a little crazy, wouldn't it? So
well.
from uh it looks to me like this is a passion project for you rather than a way to make money. Uh
I
so
probably lost money doing this.
yeah, a lot of us feel that fandom is a money sink, I can tell you. Uh so So you've told us about your plans. It seems that the major element here is to draw all the threads back together and to have that genetic evolution, as you term it, clearly delineated and brought out, and have everyone aware of their relationships to their extended family. Uh, so that's really cool. Um, let's see. Are the results you're getting the results you intended? Are you getting the right responses from people?
I think so. Like I said, ironically, it's been science fiction fandom has been more interested. Like I said, I've kind of got the cold shoulder at my first three World Cons.
Mm-hmm.
But after having the comic at Seattle World Con, it's really the first time science fiction fandom has taken a lot of interest, which I think is very good. Um, like I said, the furries equivalent of the Hugo Awards, the Ursa Majors, it's been nominated for an award. So get out and vote if you if you have a chance. And I already have heard some people saying if it's when it's finally released, it might be Hugo worthy, which is that's just saying that it's a great honor just to hear. And I've been happy with science fiction fandom. They've been, like I said, inviting me. Capricorn asked me to be a guest of honor. Actually, LA Con just recently brought me on board to help with the history side of programming. So I'm gonna be helping the Worldcon LA with the programming track history. So it's great that a lot of people are interested. Ironically enough, this actually debuted at San Diego Comic Con at my small press table. And for San Diego Comic Con, to keep your grandfathered small press table in, you have to submit what you published that year. And I submitted this as part of my small press application, and I actually got rejected. So my table at San Diego Comic Con, I've been grandfathered in for 3 years. I didn't get back in this year, so I'm not sure if comics fandom has been liking it. I don't know. But at least science fiction fandom and furry fandom's been very interested in it.
So tell us about so you've talked about a lot of different fandoms, and I read the Capricorn Guest of Honor write-up. Uh, are any of them home, or do you feel like you belong in all of them?
I don't know because I don't know if I even would say I'm a fake fan because there are people who are so dedicated in specific fandoms that once I see how dedicated and obsessive they are, I'm like, oh, I'm nowhere as close to as dedicated as you are. I'm not even sure I could call myself a fan at that point. I think technically home fandom would probably be the My Little Pony fandom. So that's actually where I first debuted. The panel was at BronyCon in
Huh.
Baltimore. And it's and it's again, that's why I say I'm worried I'm a fake fan because I honestly only watched the first two seasons of My Little Pony with Lauren Faust, and after she left, it's like okay, I'm not watching it anymore. But I think that's a joke in the Brony fandom specifically is you join for the show, but you stay because of the community. So a lot of people don't even watch the show or keep up the franchise anymore, but they stay because they found the community. And even though the it's funny. The PonyCon saw a very very similar thing that Star Trek cons did in the '70s. Really really big boom, set records, and then basically ran away, shrank away. And that's what happened with the pony convention scene. So they were very very big for a brief period, and then they're very very non-existent now. Seattle has currently the largest one, but it's only about 2 to 3 thousand attendees now. But I would say that's kind of home. If I have conflicting cons the same weekend, even though I don't make really as much money at pony cons anymore, I still go because that's kind of where the first fandom family was. Um, and that what introduced me to all that's what actually what got me interested in the DNA of the convention scene because once I found out, oh, Bronies conventions were a merger between furries and Star Trek conventions. And then starting to look at separate for pony cons, like for example, BabsCon in San Francisco, it was helped by BayCon staff. And when you realize, oh, BabsCon is the only BronyCon that has a party floor, and it was the first PonyCon to have an art show, and the art show was using supplies from Baycon and Further Confusion. I was like, oh, so that's where the DNA came from. So all these other PonyCons didn't have the science fiction DNA, but you could see this one PonyCon in San Francisco has all the hallmarks of a science fiction cons because their staff helped ran science fiction cons. And that's kind of what got me interested in looking at the DNA of that. So if there's any one con, I would say it's probably the Brony conventions. That's the family con for me.
Yeah, I think the sharing of staff is consistent. The first Star Trek conventions were staffed by science fiction fans from traditional fandom, and we usually have a couple people on that were working that first convention, but not today, to talk to. Um, let's see what else. Uh, so. Um, I think pretty soon we're going to go to questions. What should I ask you that I didn't ask you?
Um,
No,
hmm.
it's a hard question, right?
I'm not too sure. But I think spread the word. Like I said, I'm not I'm very happy that since that Worldcon in Seattle, people have been appreciating the work, but I still don't think I'm as connected with science fiction fandom as I would like to be. Um, and a lot of people don't even know about the comic or the history I've been doing, the family tree as well. So if you could help, spread the word saying I'm out here, I'm trying to learn the history and I'm doing it sincerely. I'm not an outside journalist trying to get like the dark story on the fandom. I'm sincerely interested in this. Yeah, just to spread the word. I think I grabbed the word con history everywhere. So I'm con history on Twitter, conhistory@gmail.com, conhistory.com, con history on YouTube. Just share it and say, hey, I was part of this early fandom. I would like to tell my story. Because if you want to tell your story, that'd be great. But yeah, just this, I would like to make more connections. So if you could help me make connections, that'd be great.
Okay. All right. I think that I have about run out of questions, so I'm going to ask the folks in the room if they have any other questions they would like, or if, especially about the traditional history part, the traditional the first fandom history. So if you didn't get your questions out earlier, get them out now. Maggie Thompson asked, how do we get your publications? Is it through the website?
Um, like I said, I'm actually very bad at online stuff now. At the moment, it's only whatever cons accept me to have a fan table and to do panels. I normally try to release my comic there. Um, at the moment, I guess they had to do it traditionally. Just email me directly and send a donation in, and I could mail it out to you. So hopefully the final version of this should be done by May. The aim is to get this one done by May, in time for Balticon. So I'm going to have it mailed out, and I think that follows the early tradition of mailing out scenes. So I'll probably have that information out soon. And when this is on the YouTube channel, I think I'll probably post links in the comics.
Sure.
So hopefully there will be links that I could plug to help get the word out, and so people could be able to get a copy of this. And the plan is actually this will be a dynamic web comic as well. So I have the physical copy, but the idea is to make it into a web comic. So I know a lot of the you folks probably already know all the fan terms, but a lot of younger generations don't know a lot of FANAC and Fanish words. So the idea is whenever there's a specific fan term, if you hover over it, it takes you to a my own version of a fandom lexicon, and it'll translate it for people. So
Yeah, just
hopefully it'll be a dynamic web comic.
be careful or you're going to reinvent Fancyclopedia. Jerry, would you please unmute Jerry Sullivan and ask your question?
Hi there. On your family tree, you've got something called the Tulsa incident, and I don't think I know what that is. So if you could tell me what the Tulsa incident is, that'd be great.
Sure. Actually, I don't think that's the official term for it. I just made it because, like I said, I'm the first to really compile all this history. So there's a lot of incidents that happen that technically don't have any fan terms. So I'm trying to. That was the one where the Star Trek convention in Tulsa had the cops called on them, and all the adult zine sellers had to rush out of the convention because the cops are called, so they couldn't sell their adult zines. So they rushed out of the convention and they started to form their own slash specific conventions, and that's where IDICon was formed. So I called it the Tulsa incident. I'm not sure if there's an official term for it, but it was mostly that the Star Trek adult zines being kicked out of the convention and them starting their own separate branch of slash zine conventions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Do we have any other questions? Jerry Kaufman, you're welcome to unmute and make your comment.
Yes, I was thinking when you make your announcement about further developments of the family tree and the history of fandom, to send your announcements to file770.com for Mike Glix and Mike Glyer to put in his daily feed, in case you don't already know about it, but you may. Anyway,
Mike,
I expect to come and say hello to you in Los Angeles and pick up a copy of the comic.
Oh, perfect. That'll be great. Yeah, I think Mike actually follows me on both Twitter and Blue Sky, so I'll definitely, yeah, that's a good idea. I'll definitely reach out.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. Lex, would you please unmute?
Hi. Yeah, just the Tulsa incident sounds really interesting to me. I want to know more. So if you had a bibliography, that could refer people to like where you read that, we would all love it on this call. I mean,
No, that's actually why that's also why the comic will be better as a web comic, because if you read my last I don't think any of you read my military school history book, but 1/3 of that is all just a bibliography of all my references, because I'm very, very detailed with my notes. So that's why when the comic is released as a web comic, it will have all the information there. I believe the Tulsa incident is on Fancyclopedia. If not, it might be on Fanlore. I know, so Fanlore is a separate wiki for very similar to Fancyclopedia, but I think they focus more on Star Trek fandom and slash culture. So I think it would be there. But yeah, I'll definitely have it in the bibliography when it's done.
Okay, thank you, Lex. At this time, we don't have any other questions. So I will say thank you very much, Alex. And we really appreciate hearing about your work. It's clear that you have a passion for this project. And in a 90s kid, that's really quite unusual for something like fan history. So it's great to see. So thanks for joining us.
Of course, thank you. Happy to be here.